Thanks for being here. It's my pleasure to share Ganna Walska, Lotusland. You were pretty close with all of you. And interestingly, I was just on another meeting with an alumnus of Virginia Tech, Abby Lawrence, who now works at Lincoln Park Zoo. So anyway, here we go. Scott mentioned roughly where we are in, one second, I'm not advancing here, here we go. Where we are in California, we're in the southern half of the state. Like he said, about 90 miles northwest of Los Angeles. You can see that little pink rectangle there at the base of the San Ynez Mountains. That is Lotusland. Lotusland is in Montecito, which has most recently become newly famous because of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle moving here. A wealthy neighborhood within Santa Barbara. This is the outline of Lotusland. It's a 37-acre historic estate and public botanic garden. When you come to Lotusland, there's three main eras or horticultural layers that kind of go into what you'll experience here. The first one beginning in the late 1800s when Ralph Kinton Stevens bought the property, and he developed one of the first nurseries in the area on the property. And it's said that he developed the first nursery dedicated to tropical and subtropical plants in California. This is his catalog from 1893, and it's really an interesting read. It's an amazing amount of plants that he was growing here at the time. And then out in front of what is now the main house was his trial garden, and a number of plants still exist that date back to his time here on the property. Notice this Phoenix canariensis, this Canary Island date palm in the center. There it is nowadays, towering over those towering Dracaena Draco right there. I apologize, I did not have time to put the plant names on the slides, but I will be rattling off plant names as we go if you have a pencil handy, if you're curious. The next important era was the Gavit era. They owned the property from 1916 to 1939. And they built a lot of the infrastructure that still exists. The main house, they added a pavilion, a dormitory, and you can see a lot of the pathways and water features that still exist today. This is the original swimming pool that the Gavits had built. And they called the property Cuesta Linda, the pretty hill, and it was a pretty garden at that point. But then, of course, in 1941, Ganna Walska bought the property. Madame Ganna Walska, she was a Polish opera star, fascinating person, did a lot for women's rights. I'd encourage you to read more about her. I'm not going to talk too much about her here. But she was very, I don't want to say eccentric, but strong-willed. She had 6 husbands, but she was not a gold digger. They all came to her, and some of them were some of the wealthiest people in the country at the time. So later in life, she focused her immense amount of energy, her creativity, and her money on developing Lotusland to be the unique garden that it is today. She was an artist and a collector. She designed a lot of her own dresses, jewelry, and hats. And of course, she was head gardener. So now we're going to do a tour through the garden as I would lead it if I was leading you through the garden. And we start at the main house. She bought the property in 1941, and as soon as 1942, she had torn out the traditional landscape in front of the house and had replanted with cacti and succulents. And the landscape architect she was working with at the time commended her that he would have never thought of doing such a thing and that she was wonderful. So again, this is looking west from the main house at the Dracaena Circle. And there's some really big plants. These are all Dracaena Draco, the dragon tree, as it's called, from the Canary Islands and Madeira. And those largest ones were actually put in there in 1955 while she owned the property. That we have pictures of them being dug out of another estate and craned in. But in the center is this massive Dracaena Draco, and this one dates back to Ralph Kenton Stevens' time in the late 1800s. And you can see the trunk to the left of a really large Jubea chilensis, Chilean wine palm. We have about 40 on the property that date back to his time. Excuse me one second. And then we head down the main drive, and looking back, is this magnificent view looking up at the main house. The main drive is planted with cacti on the east side, and then African succulent euphorbias on the right side, and you're looking back up at the San Ynez Mountains. Sometimes we get light dustings of snow up there in the winter, and it just makes it even that much more beautiful. We have a lot of pretty amazing cactus collections at Lotusland, 2 in particular, and here's just a little collage of these amazing plants. From there, from the main drive, we head down, dipping down into the water gardens, of course, with our namesake plant, the lotus, Nelumbo nucifera. And as I showed in the previous picture, that center bed with the lotus there is the original Gavit swimming pool. It was Ganna Walska that decided to change it to, to house water plants. And then the pond on this side has hardy water lilies, on the far side, tropical lilies. And these ponds existed when the swimming pool was a swimming pool. So you'd be swimming with these water ponds on either side, and then that's the bathhouse where you would change into your swimming garment. From there, we head south down into the aloe garden. We have a pretty impressive aloe collection, and you'll notice a lot of the individual gardens at Lotusland are sometimes dedicated to one single group of plants, and they largely feel like rooms. A lot of times you come to the corner and you're surprised by another garden or another collection. We have about 145 different aloes, and this is how you can tell it's winter in California. The aloes are flowering. It's always an amazing show. This garden was renovated in 1975, and because Ganna Walska, she was very spiritual, she believed in the spirit of the place as well. She didn't allow the designers to build an access road, so this garden was completely renovated and redesigned by hand, all the soil, all the rocks. But you can see the brick pathway in the foreground. That's an old, 100-year-old Gavit feature there. This is the abalone pond. The kidney-shaped pond existed back to during the Gavit time, but it was redesigned and reimagined by Ganna Walska and a local artist in 1958 with these giant clamshell fountains and lined with abalone shells, local abalone shells. Over on the west side, we have these. There's actually 5, 100-plus-year-old Jubea chilensis, and then this really large Bocarnia stricta on the right, a relative of the so-called ponytail palm. That was also brought in 1955, along with those large Dracaenas I had previously shown, and this was a big plant then. Some pretty aloe pictures. Aloe leuciana on the left, that's a newly described plant from Uganda. We're lucky enough to have an aloe explorer and nursery living across the street from us. And then just one of my favorite pictures now of aloe rupestris on the right. From there, you head in and through some black bamboo to enter the Japanese garden. The Japanese garden was recently a 3-year renovation, and that was largely to make it ADA accessible. We also were having troubles with the pond being murky. The pond was originally dug by Ralph Kenton Stevens as a reservoir for his ever-growing nursery. He was trying to just secure water wherever he could. So it was clay bottom until we renovated, and now it's lined. It finally has proper circulation and filtration. This picture is actually before the renovation. We also built a number of gathering areas, and it came out really amazing. This garden was originally designed and built in the 60s by Frank Fuji and a local stonemason, Ozzy DeRoss. We use baby tears to mimic moss because moss just doesn't work in our arid environment. And the flowering aloes aren't the only way you can tell it's winter in California. Sometimes we get cold enough to, well, the ginkgos always drop their leaves, but you know, the Japanese garden shows those seasons as it should. And then on the right, that's a new feature. It's the lotus viewing platform. It's surrounded by water and sacred lotus. And you can see in the distance a tree you all probably know, I would guess. Catalpa speciosa. We're very proud of being able to grow that. Eastern native here. From there, we head to the Australian garden, which is actually also the parking lot where public tours begin. But since you're getting a private tour, we started at the main house. So we have this Leptospermum arbor, Australian tea tree, some giant xanthorrheas. Like I say, this is also where the gift shop is, plant sales, pretty small building, but we do what we can. Lotusland operates, we have to operate under a conditional use permit because we're in this wealthy neighborhood. So we're actually only allowed 15,000 visitors a year and a certain number of events, and it really makes it difficult to raise the funds we need. We largely depend on grants, fundraisers, and memberships. A couple plants in the Protea family, Hakea petiolaris on the left, a Banksia on the right. From there we head up the main drive, the lower main drive. Here we have obviously an aloe towering over these Agave attenuata and Sedum pachyphyllum at the base. This was designed actually by Ralph Kinton Stevens' son, Ralph Stevens, who studied landscape architecture, came back to Santa Barbara, and actually worked here on the estate that he grew up on for Ganna Walska later on. He was Santa Barbara's first paid park superintendent as well. And one good thing that came of COVID was that when we initially closed, you know, obviously it was very scary and worrisome for the future of Lotusland and everything else, but we had a fearless ground superintendent who said, you know what, we're closed, there's nobody here, let's do something I've been wanting to do forever, and that was to completely renovate this main drive. So he got a piece of machinery and a handful of ground staff that was here, took out all the agaves, renovated the soil, and replanted it, and it just looks amazing, as it used to in the originally. Now we're going to go take a look at the cycad garden. This is by far our most important collection when it comes to conservation, research. If you don't know, cycads are an ancient lineage of cone-bearing plant. Each plant is male or female, and they were so prominent in the flora of the Jurassic era that the age of the dinosaurs was also known as the age of the cycads. Also a pond in the cycad garden, and towering over that are our three Encephalotus woodii. You've maybe read about this plant. It's sometimes referred to as the loneliest plant in the world, or these as the three bachelors. Encephalotus woodii, only one plant was ever discovered in the wild in 1895 in South Africa. And between 1906 and I think it's 1919, the plant was essentially disassembled and taken to Durban Botanic Garden. So all plants in cultivation, of which they think there's about 500 in collections around the world, are clones of this same male plant. They've never discovered a female, so you cannot produce seed of this plant. It's extinct in the wild, and you can only either make novel hybrids for collectors or try to root offsets, which are pretty difficult. We do well with the South African cycads in the genus Encephalartos. Here in the foreground is the critically endangered Encephalartos latifrons. Cycads are the most threatened group of plants on the planet. Some say the most threatened group of organisms. We have 5 in the collection that are believed to be extinct in the wild and only exist in public gardens and private collections. Like these 3 plants here are 3 individuals of Encephalotus heenani, now believed to be extinct in the wild. In 2010, we produced seed of this plant for the first time ever in the United States, and maybe the first time ever in a public garden anywhere, because it hasn't happened in South Africa where this plant originated. So we're now working with internationally on a species survival action plan for this cycad. We have in the back, the bluer one is the female, and the front right, greener one is the male. Very shy to cone, waiting, keeping my fingers crossed. It'll happen again. Another genus we do well with is Ceratozamia. This is one of my favorite plants, period. It's just so graceful. And when they have those emergent leaves, they have very unique pigments to them in Ceratozamia. This is Ceratozamia fuscoviridis, which is also critically endangered in the wild. Right now we have male and female cones on 2 different plants, so I'm excited to try to make seed of that. And then Dayun is another Mexican genus. Yes, that's what it really looks like when it's leafing out. Dayun argentium. You can see the bluer leaves in the background. That's what they look like later on when they harden off. And then just a couple cool cone pictures. On the left, Encephalotus leymanii, that's a male cone. And then on the right, Encephalotus lanatus, a female cone. For the longest time, since they're gymnosperms, people thought cycads were wind pollinated, but they actually have really complex pollination biology. Involves insects that live most of the time in the male cone and then are flushed out by the cone heating up and volatilizing chemicals, and they flee to the female cone, hopefully pollinating it, and then flushed out of there as well, back to the male cone. But not all is peachy keen in the cycad garden, and probably some of you are familiar with the fungus Armillaria. Here we call it oak root fungus. It's a naturally occurring fungus that doesn't live freely in the soil. It has to have a woody host of some sort, and unfortunately it has a really good taste for cycads, and those are the Armillaria mushrooms erupting in the middle of that clump. And so we have this huge area that's been infected now, and we're actually raising money right now. It happened previously 20 years ago, so we know what we have to do. And on the right, you can see that poor plant. We had to excise all the infected tissue, and then we will attempt to reroot it. This piece actually is pushing leaves now in a pot full of pumice on a heating pad, so I'm guessing it's rooted. But we need to excavate all the soil, find that woody host. It is usually in the form of a buried tree stump, and we know there are many in there. So wish us luck. We're embarking on this project pretty soon. It's been keeping me up at night. From there, we go into the succulent garden. This is sort of a catch-all succulent garden because, as you saw, the cacti, euphorbias, and aloes all have their own space. So we have on the left a couple different aeoniums. The purple one is Aeonium arboreum Zwartkop. Lots of Crasulacean plants, Echeveria elegans on the right. This garden was originally done by Lockwood DeForest in the late 40s, early 50s, and then renovated again by Bob Foster and Charlie Glass, who did the aloe garden and the cycad garden and a number of other things here. More pretty pictures of Bulbini in the foreground with Madagascar palm, Pachypodium lemmerii. And I guess I kind of lied. There's one aloe that snuck into this garden. You can see it in the picture on the right, poking its head in there. From there, we'll head into the bromeliad garden. Sorry, this is a little bit low resolution. We have 2 gardens to get dedicated entirely to bromeliads. The original one started up by the pavilion where Ganna Walska lived, but they proliferated so much and she would never let plants be thrown away, so it became a whole separate garden as well. You can see on the left there, Neoregelia fireball, living completely epiphytically on that Australian tree trunk, and then a terrestrial bromeliad at the base. Most of these are epiphytic, meaning in the wild, they grow up in trees, but they work pretty well for us in the ground. We just keep water in the cups where they absorb water and nutrients. This is the view from the upper bromeliad with Tillandsia usneoides hanging all over the place. Birds move this all over. We have a redwood tree that's festooned with this, 60 feet up. Bromeliads have some of the most amazing flower colors you'll see, very unique. Aechmea nationalis on the left and another Aechmea on the right. But there's something happening in the bromeliad garden right now that is super special, almost once-in-a-lifetime event, and that's this Tillandsia flowering, Tillandsia izii from Chiapas. This is monocarpic, so that it will flower and then the plant will die. But we're hoping to get seed. We're trying to pollinate it. We know some other people that have done it with limited success, but just a beautiful plant that you really don't see often anywhere, and especially not flowering. So from the bromeliads, you can head either to the blue garden. You see these giant Chilean palms with their silvery fronds. We have blue atlas cedars, blue fescue grass, some succulents, and then of course these blue agave franciscanii, which is one of our sort of signature giant agaves. It's interesting because this plant was originally described from European gardens, and it's never been rediscovered in the wild. I don't know where it could be hiding, but it's out there somewhere. And then from there, you could head down the Great Lawn to the theater garden. Story is that Madame Ganna Walska had these statues, which we call grotesque, although these two aren't very grotesque, in her in the garden in her French chateau. And in 1941, she had to flee and supposedly had these buried, and then later after the war recovered them and had them shipped out here. And then the theater is planted with a stage. We sometimes during events will have activities in there or performances. You can see that's Afrocarpus gracilior planted as the wings. From here we head over to my favorite garden, the Dunlap Cactus Garden. This was one fellow's collection that he started in 1929 and got his last plant in 1999, so 70 years of horticultural history. At the urging of Charlie Glass, he wrote to Ganna Walska in 1966, wanting to bequeath his collection to Lotusland. She didn't fully understand what he was trying to say, but she saw it as a good thing, and she referred to them as being in perfect rhythm because they were both simultaneously planning for the future of their collections. Luckily, in 1999, he turned that bequest into a donation. So we started planning for its move, which happened in 2001, and then this garden was planted in 2003. Merritt Dunlap, or Siggs, as this was called to his friends, by his friends, celebrated his 97th birthday here in the garden, up in the wing area, passed away 4 months later, and said that last year of his life was the best year of his life, and this guy had an amazing life. So we felt really proud of having fulfilled both his and Ganna Walska's dream by bringing these plants. And his big thrill was growing plants from seed. So almost half of these plants were grown from seed. It was just a hobby of his. He was a civil engineer by trade. This is the view from up on the viewing platform, literally a forest of cacti. We think Ganna Walska would approve. Very dramatic display of cacti, which were some of her favorite plants, and it's got its own separate space for the collection, and they're thriving. Some really interesting plants in here. On the left, he had a collection of these opuntias from the Galapagos. So just like Darwin's finches, there's amazing cactus diversity and lots of endemics, meaning plants that are only found on the Galapagos. And then there's these hybrid echinopsis that put on this show every spring and summer. Those were seed grown by Siggs. One of my favorite sections of the garden with these snaking Stenosarius alamosanus. And just a close-up of a beautiful Peruvian cactus on the right, Neo Raymondia. From the Dunlap Garden, we head up the Olive Alley, looking back towards the Dunlap Garden. A lot of these olives date back to Stephen's time. He offered quite a few in his catalog, and a lot of these were his stock. And then from there, we head over to the parterre, which originally was part of the Givitz development of the property. And then, of course, Ganna Walska put her flair. But in a lot of these revival, sort of Italianate style estates in this area, you see these Moorish star fountains with the runnels. Really a great feature. And then from there, we head over to admire the horticultural clock. This is actually a functioning clock. It's about 20, 25 feet across. You can see the signs of the zodiac, roughly according to the number of the month they would coincide. This also was designed by Ralph Stevens, the original son, and built in 1952. Then from there, we will go see what we call the dish hedge. I don't know much about the dish itself, but in the fountain, you have Neptune and his merman behind him. In the same area, you find the topiary garden. This was renovated, I think, in 2003. A lot of the original shapes had lost their shape. They were very amorphous and some diseased cypress and junipers, so this was a really great renovation. And then just up from that is the rose garden. That is Julia Child there in the foreground. So at Lotusland, we practice what we call sustainable horticulture. We do everything organically. I'll talk a little bit more about it. Use a lot of compost tea, all organic fertilizers, and the roses are sort of our horticultural poster child. They don't get a lot of input in terms of fertilizer, and this time of year they get weekly foliar applications of compost tea, which essentially creates a living film on the leaves and helps to suppress disease and pests, and it works. They're picture perfect here in our coastal environment where there's just a whole onslaught of things that happen to roses. From there, we're going to head down the lemon arbor. This was an original Gavit feature, but then it was rebuilt in the 80s. Madame Ganna Walska passed away in 84, and that's when the foundation took over, kicked into gear, renovating the gardens, infrastructure, in preparation for opening to the public, which finally happened in 1993 after numerous public hearings. Because of the neighborhood where we are, there were a lot of people that were concerned about traffic and noise, and since then they've learned the value of Lotusland, our collections, and we've just been good neighbors. From here, we're going to head to the insectary garden, which is sort of a cornerstone of our sustainable horticulture program, bringing in beneficial insects to fight off the bad. And this also was renovated and replanted and constantly is being replanted. We have Tower of Jewels, Echium wild pretii on the left from the Canary Islands, and then a California native on the right, Matilaha poppy, Romney coulteri. The insectary is about a 50-50 mix of California natives and non-natives. More pretty flower pictures, Tithonium, Tithonia, forgetting the specific epithet on the left, and a poppy. You know, insectary gardens are totally dependent on the flower morphology to bring in the correct insects, be they bees or wasps. A mix of yarrow and California poppies. You can see a happy bumblebee in the one on the right. We have lots of native bees visiting as well. From there, we're going to head over to the fern garden. This is what we call the original fern garden, done in the 60s when Ganna Walska was alive. And after she passed away, there was sort of a larger no man's land to the east that was developed into the fern garden extension. And the original designer, Bill Palin, was brought in for that, and he regularly consulted on the garden afterwards. Lots of just great ferns and begonias in here. Blechnum, what is now called appendiculatum on the left, and one of my favorite begonias, Begonia gertii. Although it lives under a fight, it routinely drops little figs that just go right through the leaves. So we've moved it to some other places as well. Certain scenes, when you see them, you know you're at Lotusland, and this is one of those iconic scenes. This is the newer pool. She had it built, I think, in the late 40s, early 50s, and then we have this beach with these giant tridacna shells. And yes, we do occasionally swim in the pool when it gets warm enough. Usually starts getting warm enough around this time of the year. So now I'm going to talk a bit about our horticultural and curatorial practices. So like I said, we practice sustainable or ecological horticulture at Lotusland. The goal is to build the soil food web, which will then provide nutrients to the plants, provide disease suppression, improve soil structure and water retention. So we feed the soil to feed the plants instead of just feeding the plants directly with, you know, Miracle-Gro or something like that. And because we are in such a dry environment, we try to train our plants to be rooted deeply as well. Say palms, we water infrequently but deeply, and that way they're sort of buffered against drought. So we use only organic fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. You know, we use a lot of sort of contact herbicides. We use massive amounts of compost tea, composting, beneficial fungi. We try to promote those wherever we can. And then, as I had mentioned, increased insect ecology. So this is our compost tea operation. On the left, you see the 100-gallon tea brewer. And that's constantly changing and evolving. But lately, Corey, who is our plant healthcare coordinator, has been using native oak compost. That way, we're really helping to promote those beneficial native fungi. There's one in particular called trichoderma that is said to be antagonistic against armillaria. There's no eliminating armillaria, but at least you can kind of keep it at bay if you have healthy trichoderma populations. And then we just truck it around the garden like this with our tailor-done carts, our 100-gallon pull tank. We usually use about 20 gallons compost tea, 32 ounces fish emulsion, 6 ounces kelp, sometimes some other goodies. And you can see Thomas, our cactus and succulent specialist on the right, applying just yesterday. We usually pre-water so we can get that into the soil. I don't know how many thousands of gallons we put down a year, but it's used throughout the garden in conjunction with spring fertilizing. We use a lot of this Island Seed and Feed custom landscape mix on the left. You can see it's got alfalfa meal, kelp, soybean meal, fish meal, and feather meal, and we use it in conjunction with azomite, which is a mineral amendment. We also use other fertilizers, par4, you know, humic acid sometimes in with the compost tea, but like I say, all organic. So then talk a bit about the collections at Lotusland. I know you can read this, but I'll go through it too. Palm family, Ericaceae, 189 different plants. Bromeliad family, 301. You can see the Cactaceae, 455 different plants and 91 genera, by far our most numerous collection. And then Aloe, Euphorbia, Begonia, different genera that we hold as collections. Ferns, we're a member of the Hardy Fern Foundation, which is based in Washington State, so we sort of trial ferns for them. Cycads, we have one of the probably 10 most complete collections in a public garden in the world. So a total of 200 families, 3,000 something taxa, meaning different types of plants. And being a botanic garden, by definition, we have documented plant collections. And Ganna Walska was notorious for not wanting to see labels in the garden. It was purely aesthetic for her, really. She wasn't a horticulturist. She just knew what she wanted to see. But thankfully, one of the early employees, Charlie Glass, who I've mentioned a couple times, he also acted as our first curator. So his notes kind of read like a treasure hunt. You can see up there, number 1596, Alocamptonii, planted northeast of pond, left and behind Dalensis, 1484, and in front and right of Suprafoliata. So our first official curator had to sit down with these notes and try and decipher what was still in the garden. Nowadays we use Microsoft Access. It's simple, but it works for us. This is one plant record for a Mexican cycad. Nowadays there are databases that are specific for botanic gardens. This is a plant that came to us in 2004 as seed as part of a collecting expedition between Lotusland, Montgomery Botanical Center, and Clavijero Botanic Garden in Mexico. At the time this plant was collected, it was an undescribed species. And then we also track all of our plants using GIS mapping software. ArcGIS is just another great way to back up the collections from a curatorial standpoint. And the map and the database essentially can talk to each other. So here I can go into the map and highlight that Dioun Stevensonii. And then if you see that little blue dot in the lower right corner, that is that plant in the garden. And then you can zoom in even more, and there it is. So like I say, a great tool. This plant in particular, a fellow Brian Dorsey at the Huntington Botanic Garden is studying the phylogeny of Dioun. And this plant came from Michoacan, western Mexico, which is a fairly dangerous place to go right now because of cartel activity and things like that. So instead of risking his life for his studies, he can just come here and we happily open our collection to researchers. And he gathered leaflets to study the genetics of this plant and where it falls within the genus. And there's Dioun Stevensonii. Beautiful with those reddish emergent leaves. And that, I believe, I hope I didn't go too quickly, but, and I hope you're all still there and I didn't glitch out, but that is my last slide. Thank you so much for being here.
No, that's great. Looks like a beautiful, lush area that everybody should put on their list to visit for sure.
Please do. And I wanted to mention, Scott, also for Virginia Tech students that we offer a summer internship in sustainable horticulture, and the winning student gets to come live on the property and work here for I think 2.5, 3 months or whatever it is. But it's a great opportunity because obviously you're working with a diversity of plant types, and it's a great way to kind of find a direction if needed.
I will definitely have to put that on our students' radar for sure. I can't think of who wouldn't want to spend a summer in California.
Yeah, I know,
So we have a couple questions, a couple of them pertaining to tours, and then if anybody else has any questions, please enter them in the chat box now, the chat box. But so somebody asked, do you do other virtual tours since you're limited in the number of people that you can have visit each year?
We have been, especially through these COVID times. There were so many hiccups and starts and stops at the beginning. So we came up with what's called Lessons from Lotusland. And I think they're all on our website. I did one in particular on the Dunlap, the move of that cactus project when we moved that up here. And that's just so fun for me to relive that. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that and all the others that are on the website. I also did one about aloes. There's some historical ones. There was a fantastic one recently about the Japanese garden, its history, and Niwaki pruning. So yes, please take a look at those. And it's interesting that through COVID, we've actually been allowed to have more guests than usual because we have an amazing, have had and will again, amazing educational outreach program where all the fourth graders in the area come to Lotusland after somebody visits them in the classroom. So obviously that was put on hold. And the county is now letting us apply those 5,000 spaces to our 15,000 for the year because we've been selling out 2 weeks in advance. People are just, as you know, they've been needing to get out all through this pandemic. And what better place than a public garden? So we've actually been quite busy this year.
Okay, so you pre-sell a certain number of tickets per day. Is that how that typically is done?
Yeah, and I can't remember the numbers exactly, but because of our conditional use permit, typically we are only allowed 2 tour slots, a morning and an afternoon, Wednesday through Saturday, no more than, I think it's 40 cars or 200 people a day, I believe. So yes, everybody has to make reservations to visit, even members. We're really still pretty strictly regulated. I mean, you know, a lot of gardens literally can do 15,000 people in a day. That's our yearly allotment. So a lot of people think we're doing it on purpose to be mysterious and elusive, but it's imposed by the county. And as I mentioned, it makes it really hard to raise the money we need.
It sounds like it. Yeah, that sounds like that'd be a big challenge. I think our little garden,
It really is.
it's more than 15,000 people a year. So, okay. So somebody was asking if there was any books or anything written about the lady who kind of took all this on.
Madam Ganna Walska, yes, there is. And again, I'm sure you could find it on our store. There is pretty recently a book was put together by her niece, Hanya Talmadge, and it's called Portraits of an Era. And it's a really fantastic book, lots of amazing historical photos. So yes, look for that on our website. That's about Ganna Walska. And then we have a couple books. One that's sort of it's called The Garden and Its Creators. It's a smaller softback. That it really is a great book, also about a lot about her, but as it says, about the garden and its history as well. And we're actually finishing up a really blingy coffee table book that's due out, I think, for sale next March. But it's going to be amazing. I've worked with the photographer and the writer, and just high quality, amazing photos, and a lot of history and stories in there too. So keep an eye out for that next March.
Interesting. Okay. Another question is asking, do you have an extensive irrigation network? Are you hand watering? Do you feel like your water demand is similar? Is it similar across all gardens, or does it vary from space to space?
Yeah, no, great question. We have, you know, as I've said, we're in a very arid area. You know, average rainfall would be 18 inches a year. That usually falls between, if we're lucky, November and March. This year we had, I think, barely 10 inches. And, you know, every year we have summer drought. So we've been probably 10 out of the last 12 years have been below average. So it makes it really difficult. But there's really good aquifers in Santa Barbara. So we have 2 wells on the property, and that's our water supply for the garden. And, you know, there's a couple high water use gardens, like the fern garden, obviously. You've got water loving plants in there. The Japanese garden gets pretty regularly watered. But luckily, a lot of our collections are cacti and succulents. Even the cycads are fairly drought tolerant. So we have a mix of like drip and spray systems, a lot of them on automatic timers. And then, it does vary quite a bit from garden to garden. Like the Dunlap cactus garden, it maybe gets watered twice a year. A lot of these plants do come from summer rainfall areas, so they appreciate that. But I think we feel really good about our water use in terms of how efficient we are in using this precious commodity.
Okay, great. So speaking of using commodities, what do you typically do with debris and materials that are produced on site? Are you composting or recycling everything there? Does it get shipped out?
It's a mix. We compost everything that's not super fibrous. On our tractor, we have a flail mower, essentially a giant lawn mower on the back. So we flail all the green waste that we can flail and make, big compost piles out of that we then use in the garden. And then anything else, like, agave leaves, tree fern fronds, anything like that, goes into a giant roll-off dumpster that then goes to the county, and they grind it up and turn it into mulch that is then used around the county as well. So yes, we pretty much recycle all green waste in some form or another.
Okay, great. Another question, how long have you worked there and what's the next big project?
The next big project is saving those psych ads, but I've been here since 1995. Prior to that, while I was studying biogeography at University of California, Santa Barbara, I worked at a cactus and succulent nursery that was pretty much a premier nursery. I worked there for 5 years prior. During that time, had the opportunity to work in the field in Mexico, setting up monitoring sites for threatened cacti. So when I came here in 1995, I knew the plants pretty well, but I had to learn how to, do a hedge and mow a lawn because I was now a gardener. And in 1999, I actually left Lotusland to go study plant conservation at Royal Botanic Garden Kew in London, travel around a bit, see what the world held for me, and that was me coming right back to Lotusland, and then working solely on planning and executing the move of that cactus collection. So I worked just on that from 99 to 2003. Then I came back on staff, assistant curator in 2006 and curator in 2017. And there's always projects going on. Like I say, right now what's keeping me awake at night is the armillaria issue in the cycad garden. So as I mentioned, we're actively raising money for that. We think we have enough to get started at least. We don't really know the scope of the project until we start it, I think, because we're still finding infected plants. So that's going to be a pretty big one. In terms of cycads, I also want to build a secure growing facility for these critically endangered and extinct in the wild plants that we still have in pots in the nursery. Also raising money for that. That's going to be essentially raised beds with a security fence around it, but there's a little more to it than that. So we can plant out these smaller plants and grow them to maturity and coning and essentially a captive breeding program for cycads. So those are the things on my radar. There's always garden renovations, lots of collections that need to be replaced that we can't do it without fundraising. So working on some of those things too.
Yep, we're constantly fundraising as well. I understand.
The reality of botanic gardens and nonprofits for sure.
Yeah. So one other question is, are there ever any animals that tend to stay around the garden because of the great diversity in landscape and plants?
Yes, actually. I mean, 25 or 30 years ago, we practiced more of a traditional horticulture and then got into ITM. So, there were synthetic fertilizers and some pretty nasty pesticides. And it was some of our early employees that realized, not only are we harming ourselves, but the environment, and we're now a public garden, so our guests too. So in that time, going completely organic, all manners of wildlife have moved in. We actually still have a great horned owl nest with 2 babies in it. It's just the most amazing thing. And we have a great population of barn owls. We have owl boxes all around, all manner of, not really megafauna, but, coyotes, raccoons, too many rabbits, lots of birds, and you know, we're right in the foothills, so we've never really seen them here, but you know, there are bear and mountain lions that come wandering through town every now and then. And so yeah, great wildlife going on here, all the way down to insects and soil biology. So
Okay, interesting. And then actually one more question popped up. Sandra wants to know if she can go swimming in that pool. Is that open to the public, or is it just something staff gets to do?
you know, it's not typically open to the public, but I did hear we have an event coming up that I think was an auction item at our last year's virtual gala. Every summer we have it's our huge fundraiser, most important event. And even though it was virtual last year, it did pretty well. But I think one of the auction items was a pool party, but it probably cost a pretty penny. Sometimes our summer interns get to go in there, so that's another perk. But no, typically closed to the public.
Okay, great. And the website is lotusland.org, correct?
Correct, yes. Please
Okay.
visit it.
Okay, yep, no, I've put a link to the website in our chat. So everybody definitely please go visit the website and start planning a trip to California to go visit. Looks like a very beautiful place. Paul, thanks again.
Yeah, there's a lot of great gardens around here and stuff. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. So what are the other gardens that are around there, just so people know?
Well, we have the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, which is strictly California natives and a pretty serious research institution as well. And it's set in Mission Canyon, which is just a beautiful site. Casa del Herrero is another historic estate. The garden's nice, but that one's more about the house, really. Herrero means metal worker, and it has this amazing metalworking shop where the owner used to, you know, construct things. And then all manner of private gardens and public spaces as well.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for taking the time to pull this together for us. I definitely enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody else did too. And looking forward to trying to plan another trip out to California so I can come visit you in person.
Please do. Let me know when you're out this way. And you have no idea how relieved I am this worked. The internet has been, I mean, just giving me fits all day. I can't believe this even happened. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. No, thank you. And thanks to everybody for logging in. This was our last virtual garden tour, so I think we ended it with a bang today. This was a great one. So thanks for following, and keep posted for any upcoming other events that we do. Everybody have a great day. Thanks again, Paul.
My pleasure.